probably got about 30 seconds.
30 seconds?
You could just go into like America's Got Talent or something.
I don't think anyone wants to hear that.
Yeah. Let's hear your best Robbie Bird.
It's your mic.
I don't have my phone to Google that. I'm not connected to Wi-Fi.
John, yeah.
I don't have my phone to hotspot, which is what this whole thing is.
So you don't need that. Prove it wrong.
Once you see the transfer rates on this, you're going to know that it's not using for browsing.
But you can transfer it and reduce the ASCII.
Yeah, if you want to wait like 50 years.
Have you ever watched Star Wars through the ASCII? You can tell that to this one and it'll show the entire Star Wars movie over ASCII.
Even that would probably take a really long time.
Oh yeah, well it takes 90 minutes.
Okay, I think we're going to start here. So, my name is Elisa. Thank you for having me here. This is my first. This is my first BSides, but this is my local town, so I'm really happy to be presenting here today and seeing everyone. And today we're going to be discussing jumping air gaps with networkless exfiltration. This is kind of a neat technique. It's not groundbreaking, but it is doing something unintended, which you'll see. So I work for Movia. These are cool guys. I've been working for about a month as a penetration tester. And yeah, no, I'm really liking it so far. So a little bit about myself. My interests are CVEs. I love looking for vulnerabilities. I like security research. I think it's a really fascinating area. So learning how things work and how they shouldn't, that's my mojo. That's what I do. And I like video games, EDM, dubstep, techno, and Lego. Well-rounded individual. And my last talk was at BSides Las Vegas. So you might know me as Baba Yaga. And yeah, so that's about me. So networkless communication, what exactly is it? Everyone heard about devices leaking information as a privacy concern. And this is mainly done with beacon requests. This is a very interesting area. However, we're not going to be covering the privacy aspect of this. Generally, transmissions, they're thought of as active, so point-to-point or to a particular AP. But there's passive communications that happen as well, which is GPS, cellular, Bluetooth, and these all happen in the back end. But these happen, I should say, in the background for basically making devices work seamlessly. But can devices communicate without a network? And what does that even mean? Why is this a question? Maybe if we rephrase that. So, can they communicate without a network in a meaningful way? And it's possible. We've had multiple proofs of concepts, and they mostly utilize monitor mode, or SSIDs. So these I would call inbound channels, but this is something that you do not need monitor mode to see. We'll get into that in a little bit. But I linked the research and tools in the reference sections by Tom and Alberto, and they've done extensive research and papers on this. So this is a actively researched area. It's very interesting. But a lot of these techniques, they use monitor mode. Does anyone want to have a crack at why monitor mode might be used? Anyone? Correct. So it allows for a lot of interaction with the wireless NIC. So what about manage mode? Well, let's deep dive into what that means. First, I think we're going to need to cover Wi-Fi. And no, this isn't going to be diving too deep into Wi-Fi, but basically, this is using the wireless NIC, but it's not using the wireless protocols in an intended way. So we're utilizing 2.4, 5G, whatever. This works on any band. And Wi-Fi, as you know, it holds higher level data. That's what it's for devices to communicate wirelessly. For more information on layer 2, my last talk covered this in detail. But wireless network interface controllers. So this is a device that is either built into your computer, you can have an external one, but they usually allow manage mode, monitor mode, and a couple other modes which are out of scope of this talk. So let's get into monitor mode versus manage mode. And monitor mode allows packet injection. So it could still, like, if the wireless NIC is not connected to a network on manage mode, it will not send requests, at least not manually. Not easily, I should say. And manage mode, that's what it is. Most consumer grades, they support this mode. However, not everything supports monitor mode. So some other examples of modes are mesh modes, AP modes, ad hoc, etc. But basically, here's a breakdown of what they do. Monitor mode is a lot harder to, actually, monitor mode allows easier packet injection. Manage mode is handled by the kernel and the OS. And for more information on specifically Linux, there is a couple references I linked here for how it's done and how you can achieve programming with monitor and manage mode and with making applications with it. Now, if we're looking at Windows, and for this talk, I mostly use Windows as a use case because in environments, Windows is mostly used as a business, like in a business setting. So Linux is a lot easier to, I don't want to say break, but it's a lot more dev friendly. And so part of the challenge was, can we get something to run on Windows? And in order to do that, to do monitor mode, we actually need the wireless NIC to be compatible with the network driver interface specification. And not everything is, but basically this is going to allow you to do packet injection, and you can use things like WinPCAP, NPCAP, and Airgap. And some of the images we see here, that's just the mini port. That's the driver that allows for interface for Windows to interface with the drivers and the firmware of the NIC. So let's look at the data flow a little bit. We have inbound traffic, which I would say is when you're connected to an access point. So once you authenticate, once you associate with an access point, you're connected, you can send wireless LAN frames. And outbound is usually for if you're not connected to anything, but you still need to see what's in the area. And this is where beacon frames happen. And in order for you to see these requests, you actually need monitor mode. So let's look at some of the bands and why these are important. But basically, 2.4G or gigahertz is, you have a lot more range and you can go through denser material, which makes this very important for that tackle I'll be showing you guys. 5 gigahertz channels, they're a lot shorter, but they also have a lot more channels, which we'll see. There's some newer devices that use 6 gigahertz. So we have channels, 1, 6, and 11 are commonly used on 2.4G gigahertz, and 5 gigahertz, you have a lot more, and there's more default ones that's used by end devices. And we have frequency hopping. So frequency hopping, it's just to distribute devices amongst themselves, so there's not as much congestion and interference. And devices usually do this automatically. So we're just kind of giving a high-level overview of how wireless works, how devices connect, and how they distribute themselves. This is all going to be important. So let's look at some of the challenges with outbound requests. So if we were to look back at the other slide, it's all the requests that are happening that you need to use monitor mode to intercept. So we're not connected to a Wi-Fi. We're now looking at all the management frames. And it's very hard to actually send an outbound request when you're not connected to an access point. And the reason for that is your operating system, it's interacting with the wireless NIC firmware. And again, if this NIC doesn't support monitor mode, or if you don't have the privileges, so if you don't have, for example, admin, you can't do it. And it's going to automatically drop it in manage mode. In monitor mode, it might be sending out, but again, it depends on the firmware and the NIC. There is specific conditions where, actually it's on the last slide here, where disassociation requests, authentication requests are sent outbound. But this usually happens when you're authenticating to the access point. And it's really hard to control what data is actually being sent out of these requests. But basically, without a direct network, without an access point, without peer-to-peer access points, you can't get data out. The device is going to reject everything. And as an example, let's look at some of the errors that we get. So can everyone see that all right? So if we're trying to connect to a network that just does not exist, your network SSID, because the network device passively did not register this as a nearby SSID, it's just going to say, sorry, it's not available to connect, and no information is going to be sent out. What about if we try to do packet injection but with managed mode? We're going to get some weird errors such as weird source max, weird destination max, but this isn't a loopback, but it's going to be sent to the local machine. It's never going to leave the machine at all. And I don't exactly know what this means. Like, this is a Xerox like MAC address. I'm guessing that's just an error because something's weird is happening. But so let's go back to probe requests. And what probe requests are is basically if you're trying to query a nearby area for SSIDs, your device will query them, and then the access points will respond back to, hey, you know, this is an SSID. Initially, I thought probe requests are sent on one channel, or at least the one that you were listening on. This was incorrect. Probe requests are sent on every single channel, one by one. And I'll show you why this is actually very useful and really interesting. When do probe requests get sent from devices? And this is kind of where the privacy area of this is, but it's all the time. And every 802.11 device sends this, because this is how Wi-Fi works. But what control do we have over these probe requests? So if we look here, we have a client in the top left, and it can send a probe request, and it will go through every single channel. If you're listening on every single channel, or at least one of them, you will catch one of these probe requests. So an attacker can realistically be listening to every channel with like something like a pineapple or a coconut, but you're going to get that probe request on multiple of them. And on multiple, you're going to get on 2.4 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz, and on the right side here we have Wireshark catching these requests. So this was kind of weird how I found this, but I was trying to find, again, how to do outbound communication. And by clicking that button on Windows 11 to basically show nearby SSIDs, the minute that you click it, it sends a probe request. And I was like, wait, so you can click a button and you can get a signal coming out of the device if you're not connected to an access point? That's cool. Okay. So that got me thinking, okay, we got control when we send these requests. And if we were to do time-based exfiltration with this, it's going to be, I wouldn't recommend it. It's incredibly slow. So this probably wouldn't be the most viable way. However, what if we spoof the MAC address of the victim device? And this is usually done on attacker devices, but in this case, we can use the Windows registry, use PowerShell to change basically the MAC address of that particular control set, and restart the NIC, send a probe request, and we have an outbound request with a spoofed MAC address. It worked. This is crazy because we have information that we're sending outbound that is controllable without being connected to a network on managed mode, so not monitor mode. I'll have a demo in a second, but basically it's possible. It's done with a MAC address. It's very small amount of data you have. You have 48 bits of data that you basically need. You need control over. You need an identifier, basically, for these requests to know that these are yours and not someone else's. Here's a cool story. When I was first trying to research this, a couple of my friends, we went to like an Irish pub. And I pulled out both my laptops, and I was like, hey guys, check this out. And then I got a request from someone. I'm like, wait, that's not for me. I was intercepting someone else's address that happened to have the same identifier that was mine. And I'm like, oh man, we're going to need a much more complex identifier in order to know that this is, ours and not ours. But we're only dealing with 48 bits, so it's quite small. And then we have challenges such as how do we know when the attacker, or how does the attacker know when the message is finished? Turning the WNIC on and off, it adds to the total transfer time. So, but overall, these are managed frames that are being sent. So without you being on monitor mode and listening, you will never know this is happening. So let's look at some of the encoding strategies that I've done. And I'm sure there's more efficient ways to do this, but for the POC, this is what it is. You have the first 3 octets, which are used as the identifier. We needed something long enough because, again, then you're going to have some interference with other devices. You have the number of chunks to know what number the message is being sent, and the last 2 octets are basically for the encoded data. You can restructure these any way you want, but you're always going to be limited to 48 bits of data. All right, so this is incredibly slow. We're looking at 0.12 bytes a second. But here's the thing, it's possible. So on that attacker terminal here, we have an intercepted message, which is just the who am I command issued on the victim device. And it just shows my desktop name plus my username. And this is on the victim terminal. Automatically, we run the who am I command. We encode it into the several MAC addresses, and then we send it through probe requests. All right, now for the demo. So first, as an attacker, we have to set up Airmon NG. We take a look at what is our listening device that we need, and we then have to check what network processes are running in the background. If anyone has done wireless network pen test, then you know exactly what this is doing. But basically, we're going to kill those processes that might be interfering with. Okay, that did not work. Oops. Sorry, guys. Wow, I was on a roll there. Okay. Can you see this now? All right, let's restart this. All right, so first thing, you're running Airmon NG, you're taking a look at what interfaces are running and which one you want to listen on as the attacker. Okay. And you're then going to check the processes that might be interfering with your monitor interface, and you're going to have to kill those listening interfaces. So we can see there on the top right, we are now disconnected from the network. And we now set our listening device on monitor mode. So again, this is not a victim. And we're going to run the Avro shell, Avro Arrow tool that's going to intercept these MAC addresses. So we're now listening on beef. That's the first 4 octets. 3 octets, sorry. So we're on the victim side, we're changing the, let me just go back a little bit here. On the victim end here, we have the exfiltrated message as BSides Calgary 2021, sorry, so it's like 2020. And basically at that point, we just need to run as admin that particular tool that I made, Avro Arrow. And we'll see here the exfiltration time as it takes. So this is not real time, this is fast forwarded a little bit. But we can see the victim exfiltrating, the attacker catching it. And in a couple seconds here, we're going to have a completed message. So there you go. So 2 minutes and 2 seconds took to transfer about 19 bytes of data. It's not fast, but it worked without a network. All right, so how can we make this a little more useful, and how might attackers use this? Well, we can use stateful communication and buffers. And basically, we can issue commands with SSIDs, and I'll kind of get into this as a C2 framework. But if there's a particular, if there's a chunk missing, the attacker can query the victim device saying, hey, I'm missing chunk 3. The victim can then issue chunk 3 back. It's very slow. I don't have this implemented in the POC, but this is how it might be used. So this is now for the C2. Because monitor mode is required to see any management frames, victim devices are unlikely to be seeing those commands. So one of the techniques is to use SSID channels. So basically, as an attacker, you spin up a hotspot with who am I or whatever. That's the attacker command. Obviously, it'll be more encoded. But the victim would then see it because it's also issuing probe requests, and it would know, hey, this has an attacker identifier, this has a command, I'm going to run it. These POCs exist, so in this POC I did not include it, but it's, this is one way how you can have bidirectional communication. So now let's talk about what devices are affected by this. And anything that supports 802.11, so smartphones, IoT devices, ICS. However, I'm kind of omitting one important fact here. This is a post-compromise exploit. And we'll get into why that's important and why it should be considered when you're doing a risk assessment on this type of attack. Also, this works on all operating systems, again, that interface with Windows 11. But what devices might not be susceptible to this? So when looking at a form of exfiltration, you need kind of one of two conditions: initial compromise, or you need to have this through a backdoor or through a supply chain attack. And the only other device I can think of that, like if your device isn't susceptible to those, you're likely not going to be vulnerable to this. You might be vulnerable to other stuff, though. But an IoT device that doesn't have a lot of power, it might not be good to use this. At that point, the attacker just might drop in their own box. That's Occam's razor. But let's look at something a little more cool. So extending the range of this attack. So we know that this is possible. Well, how far away can an attacker be from an endpoint device that's infected now with this covert malware? So, actually, let me go back here. And this is the antenna that I created. I used a Yagi antenna, connected it to my Alpha RTL WNIC to a Cali box. And this is what it looked like. It looked really cool. And we were, so Quinn and I, who's in the audience here, we were testing the range of this POC. So the first test that we did was on Range Road 25. And we did a 450 meter test. And then we did Springbank Road, the kilometer plus test. So if you saw us like going around with a big antenna, that's what we were doing there. This is what it looked like. So we're driving around with an SUV with a big friggin' thing sticking out of it. I don't recommend doing this near the airport, but anyway, yeah. So Quinn was in his car, and in the passenger seat he had my Asus laptop. Just to make a little note here, that was all he had. It was like there's no power amplification, there's no antenna, just my Asus laptop with its built-in wireless NIC on management. This was mine, an even cheaper Acer with a bunch of stuff glued onto it. And this was on the back seat after we moved it a little bit. And we can actually see here we had an interception happen. I don't remember how far away this was, but I think it was one of the initial tests. So as Quinn was going in reverse on this road, we were basically on the call, making sure that interception was happening. And you can see here, I took a picture of him, he was taking a picture of me, and that's where we're measuring. He then went on his, he went back, measured the road. It was about 450 meters. We were getting a stable connection. So then we went on the Springbank Road, and he had to zoom in like 100 times to even see me, to see me there. I didn't even know where he was at that point. So let's look at the results now. Now, before I get to it, does anyone have an idea of how far away this was? Just based on the wireless standard, like 802.11, 2.4 gigahertz. All right. So the transmitting source was my Asus. The catching was my Acer laptop in the back of my car, and that's all it was. We got 2.1 kilometers. We ran out of road, so it was kind of hard to test. It's safe road, yeah. We would have to go through like a farmer's field, and that would be kind of hard to explain what we're doing there. But realistically, I think because we're not using intended Wi-Fi communication, it doesn't actually matter if we're getting, a protocol that works. We're just getting a stateless probe request that can be intercepted basically at line of sight. I'm not going to make any bold claims, but I do think the curvature of the Earth might be a bow like this. So, what about detections now? Basically, this is kind of the hard part of the presentation because we don't have any real use case of this, and it's a very specific attack. You can look for abnormal repetitive transmissions of probe requests. If the baseline for an area has 100 unique MAC addresses at any point in time, any more could be suspicious. However, this wouldn't work in a highly populated area. For example, somewhere in a college campus or in downtown. From an EDR perspective, this one's kind of interesting because once you have a malware, remember this isn't connected to any network. So how are you going to, how is that EDR going to communicate back home and say, hey, there's some weird MAC address stuff? It's not connected to anything. So once it is back online, if it is back online, any MAC addresses changes should be reviewed. But then we also have MAC address randomization on phones, which again makes it a little harder, but then we need a malware specific to iOS or Android. Entropy over MAC addresses at a particular time can be indicative of anomalous transmissions. I didn't memorize that. But basically, MAC addresses shouldn't change. So if an area has many non-repeating MAC addresses that only appear once, but like they only appear once, it should be indicated that why is this device here? Where did it come from? You know, it's not repeating. Many probe requests are normal, but 100 unique ones should be sparking some sort of investigation of, hey, you know what? What's going on here? Is there anything? But unfortunately, thresholds are going to be the limiting factor of this, because it depends on the location. It depends on also like how much you can intercept and like where your scanners are, because you need to be monitor mode to even know this is happening. So let's look at some of the mitigations, and this might be kind of interesting for some, but because we're using PowerShell to edit registries, if you disable the wireless NIC, you can just enable it, and it's enabled. If you put your device in airplane mode, that doesn't matter. This communication still happens. So airplane mode doesn't matter. We can manually remove the driver from Windows. However, I restarted my laptop and it reinstalled it, so that didn't really work. You would likely need a GPO in Windows to prevent this, but then you would have to have a fallback channel in Ethernet to read these instructions. But even then, what office environment is going to turn off wireless NICs in an office environment, unless, again, you're connected through Ethernet? I can't answer on this statistic, but I think it's unlikely because a lot of businesses are utilizing Wi-Fi. That's the main point of the laptop. So what's the last resort? Does anyone want to guess? Yeah. I don't want to be like a fear-monger here, but yeah, like if your device shouldn't be talking on wireless, it should not have wireless. Not just disabled, not just like physically removed in any OT equipment. And this is by regulation, by the way. If you're in critical infrastructure, you're going to have to go through these audits, but they have to be removed. And it's for one of these reasons, not the only reason. Now let's kind of get into the other reasons. We have different types of networkless attacks. And some of them are really cool, but you should definitely check out Isaac's talk. It's happening tomorrow at 9:30 a.m., track 5. He's using ultrasonic to exfiltrate information. We have BSides, which uses LEDs for exfiltration. BitWhisper, it uses heat. Rambo, which is really interesting, it uses radio frequencies generated by RAM to exfiltrate information. Mosquito, speakers, audible signals, so a little separate from ultrasonic. And then GSM, which uses GSM frequency. That paper was so dank, I couldn't get through it, but it's pretty interesting. An important note for this is each technique has unique conditions and restrictions. So when you're analyzing risk for your particular environment, you have to know what are you trying to prevent against. If it's a low-range attack, that might be a factor. If you have an office, which a lot of area, you might want to look at longer range exfiltrations than one. But that's kind of what we did